The bus rumbled down the dusty road, kicking up swirling clouds of dust. The town of Silent Hollow appeared through the haze, a ghost town bathed in the eerie orange glow of the setting sun. Boarded-up windows stared back at them like vacant eyes. Cracked pavements snaked through the town, swallowed by weeds and neglect. Alex as Alex. A shiver ran down my spine. This place felt wrong. Carlos as Max. Creepy, right? This is going to be awesome. Max loved a good scare, and this town practically screamed haunted. Our friends, Emily and Jake, weren't so sure. Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Jake, ever the skeptic, just rolled his eyes. Our destination was a mansion at the edge of town. It loomed over Silent Hollow, a crumbling monument to forgotten grandeur. Twisted iron gates guarded the entrance, barely clinging to their hinges. The mansion's silhouette was stark against the darkening sky, its windows like empty sockets in a skull. Alex as Alex. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and excitement. What had we gotten ourselves into? This trip was supposed to be our last hurrah before college, a chance to make memories. But as we piled out of the bus and the engine sputtered away into the twilight, leaving us in an unsettling silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a mistake, a big one. Maria, as Emily, we were warned about Silent Hollow. Local legend spoke of a curse, a tragedy that befell the town years ago, leaving it abandoned and haunted. But teenagers are a stubborn bunch, fueled by a sense of invincibility and a thirst for adventure. We told ourselves it was just stories, local folklore meant to scare tourists, but as darkness descended upon Silent Hollow, swallowing the last rays of light, the stories began to feel terrifyingly real. Emily's voice echoed in the cavernous hall as we stepped inside the mansion. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and something faintly sweet like decaying flowers. We had managed to pry open a side window, its old frame groaning in protest. Now, armed with flashlights and nervous energy, we were exploring our home for the night. The mansion was a labyrinth of shadowy hallways and darkened rooms, each one whispering forgotten secrets. Carlos as Max. Let's split up, cover more ground that way. Emily and I exchanged apprehensive glances. The mansion felt alive, its silence broken by creaking floorboards and the rustling of unseen things. But before we could protest, Max was already disappearing down a hallway, his laughter echoing behind him. Hans as Jake. This is a terrible idea. Let's just stick together, okay? For safety. Emily nodded eagerly, clutching onto Jake's arm. We decided to start with the main hall, hoping to find a room suitable for the night. The air grew noticeably colder as we ventured deeper into the mansion. A sudden draft slammed a door shut somewhere in the distance, the sound like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. Alex as Alex. Did you hear that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Maria as Emily. It's probably just the wind. Emily's eyes were wide with fear, but even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. The wind couldn't possibly account for the icy breath I felt on the back of my neck, or the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. We eventually found a room at the end of a hallway, its once grand fireplace now filled with cobwebs and ashes. We spread our sleeping bags on the dusty floor, our laughter a poor attempt to mask our growing unease. It was decided that we'd take turns staying awake, 2 at a time, just in case. Hours crawled by. The silence of the mansion was broken only by the crackling of the fire we had managed to build in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows in their frames. Shadows danced on the walls, fueled by the flickering flames and our jumpy imaginations. It was during Jake and Emily's watch that things took a turn for the worse. Maria as Emily. It moved. The portrait, it moved. I was jolted awake by Emily's piercing scream, the sound echoing through the silent mansion. Scrambling to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs, I saw Emily backed against a wall, her eyes wide with terror, pointing a shaking finger at the doorway. She was pointing at a dusty portrait that hung above the fireplace, its gilded frame tilted at an unnatural angle. The portrait depicted a young woman in a flowing white gown, her eyes seemingly following our every move. Carlos as Max. It's just an old painting, Max scoffed, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The woman in the portrait seemed to stare directly at us, her lips curled into a subtle, knowing smirk. The temperature in the room plummeted, sending a fresh wave of goosebumps erupting across my skin. Suddenly the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere downstairs. We all froze, listening intently. It was followed by the distinct thud of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming up the stairs. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my chest. We were not alone. Jake whispered, his voice tight with apprehension. He grabbed an old poker from beside the fireplace, its metal cold against his palm. We huddled together, our flashlights casting dancing shadows on the walls, our breaths fogging in the cold air. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. The silence stretched, each tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner amplified in the stillness. Then a slow, deliberate rapping on the door. 3 times. Alex as Alex. My blood ran ice cold. Hands as Jake. Don't move. Jake breathed, his grip tightening on the poker. He inched towards the door, his back pressed against the wall, motioning for us to stay put. We watched, our eyes glued to the door, as Jake slowly, silently turned the handle. The hallway beyond was plunged in darkness. Jake took a hesitant step forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Hands, as Jake, "Hello, is anyone there?" Only silence answered him. He took another step, then another, disappearing into the darkness. We waited, holding our breaths, the tension thick enough to choke on. Seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. Then, from the depths of the mansion, a blood-curdling scream. It was Jake, Carlos as Max. "Jake!" Max shouted, fear lacing his voice. We scrambled to our feet, Emily and I clinging to each other for support, our fear a tangible thing in the cold air. We rushed into the hallway, following the sound of Jake's fading cries for help. But the hallway was deserted. There was no sign of Jake. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before us, the darkness pressing in like a suffocating blanket. We called out for Jake, our voices hoarse with fear, but the only response was the echo of our own terror. He was gone, vanished. And as I looked down the dark hallway, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. We were trapped in this house with something sinister,